All right, yeah. So if you saw on a previous video I made, I was rocking the 55 to 200, and I was pondering if I should get the 50 to 140, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be worth it. Well, I had a bunch of comments saying that I wouldn't regret getting the lens, so I picked it up. It was on sale. I believe it was like 12 or 1300. And yeah, safe to say I do not regret getting this compared to the 55 200. All right, so a few differences physically. We'll talk about the physical quality and then the image quality, and then I'll show you some like simple little images I took just to show off the comparisons. So immediately off the bat, one thing that I did not like about the 55 to 200 is I would always bump the aperture ring and I would always mess up the aperture. The aperture actually isn't marked on the 55 to 200, which also kind of bothered me. You had to look through the camera to see what aperture you're on. And you can see how, like, I mean, it feels really good. Both lenses feel amazing, the quality-wise, like physically. But definitely the 50 to 140 does feel even more high quality. It feels a little more rugged and a little more strong, I guess. But yeah, so you see how smooth the aperture ring is on the 55 to 200. Now on the 50 to 140, see, has a little more friction to it, which I like. It's not as easy to bump and mess up. So, and you see it is marked on here too. So that helps a lot. The focus on it, the 55 to 200 has a stiff like focus maneuvering. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, which I liked. I didn't mind it at all. And they have to make it stiff. Otherwise the lens would drop, because you see it telescopes out like that, which I never really cared for. I couldn't really rock this on a gimbal or anything for video, but I've always had the lens hood on it just to protect it and kind of keep dust out since I'm always in the desert shooting. But on the 50 to 140, I mean, you see the size difference. So it's that big because it's all internal. It's not going to pop out, but the zoom is just like gorgeous. Like the way it's just so smooth and light. And it's not light to the point where you'll accidentally bump it, but still light enough for it to be kind of like, I don't know. It feels really solid. Image quality wise, I'll go over some photos that I took, but I thought the 55 to 200 was really good image quality wise. I was like, this is an amazing lens. It's pretty damn sharp for the price. The contrast was always weird to me. It felt kind of flat, and it kind of felt like it was being underexposed. I mean, that might be the aperture and me underexposing things naturally, but definitely when you get the 50 to 140, the contrast is better. So definitely the 50 to 140 or the 55 to 200 contrast is kind of lacking. It's also, this is pretty saturated, which I like. So this has better contrast, saturation's a little more lower, but I mean, that's stuff that you can easily edit. But the contrast, that's kind of hard to edit. To have more, for a lens to have like natural, better contrast, definitely is going to help you in the edit. This is actually sharper. I wasn't expecting that. I thought the 55 to 200 was pretty damn sharp, but the 50 to 140 actually has better sharpness on it. Let's see, is that it? I'm trying to think what else, if I'm missing anything. Yeah, I don't know. Overall, the 50 to 140 is definitely a better lens. Again, I was shocked. I didn't think it would be that much different, but it's way different. Now this thing doesn't really come off my camera. I do miss that 200 millimeter compression. That's basically 300 millimeter on the crop sensor. I do miss that compression. It's a slight difference, but it's enough for me to miss it. So I don't know, I might get the extension tube or whatever it's called. We'll see. But yeah, let's dive into the simple little images I took just to see the differences. I'll also pop in pictures between the two that I've taken with both of them. I've done a few shoots with this and definitely can stand it. But yeah, let's jump in. All right, y'all. So let's get into this. So the lens, so for these tests, I shot everything as wide open as the lenses can go. So the 55 to 200 is a variable aperture, so it goes from 3.5 to 4.8 as you're zooming in. The sharpness is turned off on all of these, and I haven't touched the exposure on any of these, so I try to expose them. Well, for the indoor shots, I kept the aperture, or I kept the shutter speed and the ISO the same between both lenses, so you could see how much more light you can get with the 2.8. So this is the 50 to 140,
And then this one's going to be the 55 to 200. So you can see the lenses right here, 55 to 200, and the 50 to 140. So again, the sharpening's turned off on all of this, so it's just super raw photos, no adjustments or anything. Right off the bat, you can see that the 50 millimeter, 55 millimeter makes a pretty big difference on the focal length. You wouldn't think it's that big of a difference. Like if you look at the Gatorade bottle, you can see the sharpness on here. I'm not sure where it was focused. I think I was trying to focus in on his beard. So again, this is the 50 to 140, and then this is the 55. Let's wait for it to load. So you see the 55 to 200 is actually pretty sharp. Like it's not a bad lens at all. But if we go over to the 50 to 140, obviously it's not zoomed in as much, but you can see there's just a tiny bit more detail. I don't know if I would say it's sharper, but it definitely has more detail. You can see more strands of his hair, and it's not really as mushy. It's not as blended. Again, let's go back to this one. So obviously it's zoomed in a little bit more, but I don't know if you can tell. It just looks a little more mushy, and it's also because the exposure is a little bit better out of the 2.8. So here we go again. This is the 50 to 140 and the 55 to 200. You can see the focal distance. So again, you can see right off the bat, the 50 to 140 is sharper, and then this is it zoomed in. So this is at 140 millimeters, and then this is 200 millimeters. So again, when I was saying the 200 millimeters, it goes up to f4.8. And on the 50 to 140, it stays at 2.8. So you're still getting all that light in. So usually I shoot out in the desert and it's super bright. So that 4.8 never really bothered me. But you do kind of lose. I mean, you get cool separation and compression from being able to zoom into 200 millimeters. But I'd rather have more bokeh at 140 than less bokeh at 200. I might get the teleconverter. I know you lose stop of light, but again, I shoot in like a lot of daylight, so it won't be a big problem to me. But again, we can see that the 2.8 is definitely has more clarity than the 200 mil. And we can bump up the exposure, so you can see how much you have to bump it up to kind of match them. Got one half stop, extra exposure, clean exposure without having to raise the exposure in post and getting more noise out of the image. Aperture beats out over exposure adjustments every time. So one thing is when you push these files and you push the exposure, you're going to raise the shadows and everything. So you get a flatter image, which you might be into. But if you want it to look like it's supposed to look, I would try to get it right in camera. Usually I always underexpose my images, but I've been learning with the Fujifilm, it's better just to expose it correctly. Even in daylight, unless you're like doing super backlit stuff, then kind of have to balance that out yourself. But you can see the clarity again. Beard's looking all mushy, and again, that's also because we had to push that exposure way up. So you're bringing all this noise out, and you're just kind of losing clarity. And then on this, you just see overall more clarity on it. I know, guys. I know this is like really boring. I'm trying not to like pixel peak, you know, but just more of realistic result. Again, when you're on a photo shoot and everything's high pace and you're getting thrown in conditions that aren't always going as planned, these little minute differences make a huge difference at the end of the day. Especially when you're getting paid $1,000 a day, you need to make sure that you're getting the exact quality that they're expecting, you know? Here's the 50 to 140 and the 55 to 200. I can see there's more clarity up in these highlights going to the shadows, more contrasty parts. These little wispy parts, see a little more clarity in there too. Then you go to 55 to 200, and we're losing that clarity up here. But again, it's still pretty sharp, so let's go in 5. And you also see a saturation difference here. The 55 to 200 has a little more saturation on it than the 50 to 140. Now I zoomed in. So this is 140 millimeters and 200 millimeters. You see on the highlights, they look a little more bloomy. I mean, it still looks like pretty dang sharp for how affordable that lens is. And then the 50 to 140. So again, not being as zoomed in, it's kind of hard to tell, but you could definitely see there's a little more definition in all these strands. The highlights aren't blooming out as much. Let's zoom in. Let's add some sharpness now. So this is the 50 to 140, zoomed in 100% sharpness. But you can see how pretty clear that is. There's no bunch of bloomy artifacts or anything like that. It's just cool, nice clarity. You can see the the strands in the back on the rear palm leaf. That's pretty cool. Now let's go to the 55 to 200. Again, you see a contrast difference. You see the highlights have a little more bloom to it. Just overall a little bit less clarity. You can still see these strands in the back, but they're not as defined. They don't pull out to me as much as the other ones did. I mean, this still looks gorgeous. Like, I actually don't mind how this looks. That whole bloomy filmic look, actually. 140 millimeters. Again, sharpness is turned off. And then 200 millimeters. So you can see the compression is going to make it look like there's more bokeh. But it's not more bokeh. The bokeh in the background is more distracting. That's one thing that's always bugged me about this lens is the bokeh on it's not the most creamiest thing, especially when it's, because you have to go down to 4.8 when you zoom in. So I love the compression on it, and again, the cherry looks pretty sharp. It looks pretty clear. You can see like a little bit of the details. If we sharpen this, those details will pop out a little bit. But the bokeh is just, especially when it comes to like twigs or anything like that, or like fine details of mountains or anything like that, it would always kind of like pop out, especially when you go and sharpen it. Now, the 50 to 140, you can see that bokeh's, I don't know if I would say a lot smoother, a little bit smoother. It just looks totally different. Definitely looks smoother. I won't gauge it how much, but you can even see in the lease over here how that bokeh is just going out like that. So if you want to add more compression, I would have walked up 3 feet, and it would have been the same thing almost. So again, I might get that teleconverter, but you lose the stop of light, so it's pretty much the same thing. So I don't know if it's worth it. I kind of want to get the 100 or 300 or 400 millimeter lens. We'll see. And let's just move on to this last one. I just want to get a fence in the background so we can see the bokeh again. So this is the 50 to 140 and the 55 to 200. I try to match up the focal lengths. It's saying this is 128 millimeters, and then obviously this was zoomed into 140 millimeters, but it looks pretty similar, so I don't know what the deal is on that. But so the 50 to 140, you see how smooth and creamy all this bokeh looks. It's pretty crazy, especially in the fence. Like, it looks pretty good, especially up here. Look, pay attention to this part up here. So let's go to 55 to 200, and you can see that bokeh got kind of ugly. You can kind of see that there's details, and it's kind of, there's some sharpness in this bokeh. And then again, you go back to the 50 to 140, and it's just butter. So that's the reason I got this lens. People told me I wouldn't regret it, and instantly, just from these tests and from the shoot I did, they were right. So, and then here's the 55 to 200 zoomed all the way in at 200. So you can see that there's more compression, but this bokeh is just gross. And the highlights, the contrast on it is just, I don't know. Let's go back to the 50 to 140. Like, everything just looks better on this. So, but yeah, sorry, it's kind of a boring video. I'm just kind of excited that I got this lens. I just want to, and anytime I get new gear from Fuji, I always want to test it up against my other gear. And yeah, safe to say, I'm keeping this lens. I'm selling the 55 to 200. So if anyone is interested in buying it, let me know. It's a little bit beat up, so be aware. But yeah, guys, peace.